The phrase of Einstein says that miracles, they do not contradict to the laws of nature. They contradict to our understanding of them. You cannot just tell a story with any scientific background to people that have no knowledge. You need to create a fiction story that people can memorize and people can better and easier understand it. And maybe in some generation they understand what was meant by that. Pythagoras, he said that to his students that they should never stop believing in myths, even if they think that that's a crazy tale story, fairy story, or whatever.
What if you turn hardship into greatness, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Welcome, I'm Yanik, your host, and now joining me, Alexander Morpheigh. Alexander Morpheigh is the author of The Pythagorean. The Pythagorean is a book just released in September 2024 by Book Baby. An incredible story of a young man who finds himself in ancient Greece. And now here is the author of this beautifully written book, Alexander Morpheigh. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Yanik. I am pleased to be here and thank you for inviting me.
Who is Alexander Morpheigh in one sentence?
Alexander Morpheigh, from one hand, is a software engineer. From another hand, he's the researcher of ancient Greece philosophy.
So, what made you write such a thorough book while at the same time being an engineer? Did you always had a dream of one day writing a book when you were in your childhood?
Well, I never saw myself as an author, and I never thought about writing a book at all. So it came up, well, very occasionally, I would say. Around maybe 7 years ago, I sponsored and organized a shooting of a documentary movie about contemporary Pythagoreans and what we have today, if there is any heritage of Pythagorean philosophy. The documentary was not released yet, but then after shooting, I understood that I have enough material to systematize it and then to try to present it as a fiction book.
What drove you to the Pythagorean and to Greek philosophy?
This is an interesting question, really interesting question. But before answering for myself, I would like to answer. I would like to give you an answer from one of contemporary Pythagorean. During the research and the shooting of the documentary, we succeeded to find at least three different societies, Pythagorean societies, and all of them were consisting only of high rank scientists, professors, university professors. And when I was asking many of them, guys, how being a professor of physics, of astrophysics, you become a Pythagorean? Each of them were saying the same. As soon as you try to find answers on the questions that the modern science doesn't give you, you start to enter the area of the philosophy of ancient Greeks and Pythagoras. And the same was for me.
That is beautiful, and that's what I also love about the book because you really weave together also tradition, religion, and all those different wisdom, and to really kind of and you juxtapose it together, really, of really finding answers to perennial questions. And what's also very interesting is that you mentioned scientists, right? There is ultimately this 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 wall we hit, that we can't really go any further, right? I mean, there is only so much that we can observe, but then there is this question of, well, what does this all mean? If we figure everything out, well, what then? What if? And so, what do you think is the biggest question for most people, and especially for scientists who are at the cutting edge of research?
I would say that the common thing between regular, usual people, us, and the scientists can be finding out and figuring out the picture of the world. Most of people, they want to understand what's the picture of the world which we're living in, right? For usual people, it can be more practical and more simple. For scientists who are at the cutting edge of science research, is exactly the same, but on more complex level. For example, in the book, you have seen many things and many episodes probably that can look as fantasy, but in fact they are not. For example, when there is a description about the time traveling, right? Physical time traveling. So there is a well-known fact that was described by a few ancient Greek authors, quite respected authors. They write that Pythagoras at the same time was seen in the three, four different places. And I was asking one of members of Pythagorean Society. He is a professor of nuclear physics, very serious man. And he told me, yes, we know about that, we read about that, and our understanding that it's caused by the properties of time, and it's the features of time. And he was explaining me how they understand it, and I explained it in the book as you have read. So many scientists, they when they start to research their area, and they come to questions that cannot be answered by traditional science, they try to find answers and define them in the area of philosophy, which is also it's the area which is on the edge between the philosophy and science.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You actually mentioned in the book too. I think it was, I think you were quoting Einstein, that oftentimes it's miracles. Let's say it's not so much that they don't exist, but it's just that the idea we have about those miracles just don't apply. So can you
Yeah,
explain to us a little bit more about what you mean by that? I'm not, probably I'm not getting the quote right, but there is something that oftentimes just the ideas about something are not really correct, but it doesn't mean that they do not exist.
yeah. The phrase of Einstein says that miracles they do not contradict to the laws of nature; they contradict to our understanding of them. And the meaning of that is that if you would try to explain to a man in 18th century that it's possible to speak in real time to someone who is located in Europe and in America, he would think that you're crazy. But it is possible just because there are some laws of nature that can be used for that, like radio waves, right? So the same when we speak about teleportation, for example, the immediate move from one point to another point. Today, according to the same Einstein, we say that it's impossible. But at the same time, for example, when in 1986, Alan Aspect has found out that when he changed spin of two particles, and he put them at some distance. When he changed the state of one particle, the other one is changing immediately. So then scientists started to understand that, guys, it seems that there is something in the laws of nature that we still do not know. So there are some things which today seem impossible and sound crazy, but probably that's because there are still some laws of nature which are still undiscovered and that we still do not know.
And it's also so true what you're actually saying because, when you think about science fiction, what we have now, like we have reusable rockets, right? I mean, SpaceX, what they are doing, it was inconceivable for most of us, let's say 50 years ago, or not even
Absolutely,
50 years ago.
absolutely, I agree.
How do you how do you see, especially also as an engineer, the progress that we are going through and looking at the past? How do you make sense of it? And do you think that's just a natural consequence and ultimately there's almost no limits what we can actually do? Because what I really saw, and that's why I find this book is so beautiful, is that there are almost no limits, and all the imagination, all the dreams, all the fantasies that we always had, especially in uh, in fiction books, are really, really possible. We just don't know yet how they actually work. We don't have the science yet, but we might get the, get there at some point.
I believe so. I believe so that science is advancing today so fast and so far only because it puts the tasks which seem impossible. If, for example, we think about something simple, we put simple tasks, then we would go slow in our science, in our scientific researches. But as soon as we put bigger tasks, we make longer steps and bigger steps. So you mentioned about reusable rockets. That's absolutely true. But there are also some other aspects of science that would seem absolutely impossible in the past, but now they are. When you speak about science fiction, you probably remember the book of Isaac Asimov, I, Robot. So, which seemed completely impossible, but when you see today at robotic shows in Dubai, in the United States, you see that what Isaac Asimov was writing, it's becoming true, and only 50 years passed.
Do you think in a lot of these books as well, especially when it comes to kind of where there is a lot of fear that AI can take over humanity and so on, do you think that this is partly just kind of for us, for humanity, uh, an important reminder that we have to be cautious about those kind of things. We have to really, really be careful what we are doing. We should never ever inhibit science because we can't take it for granted. We can never take progress for granted. And yet, those are to some extent windows into the future that helps us in making and guiding us to make really ethical decisions in terms of really humanity's future.
An interesting question. I'm dealing with AI in my daily job with neural networks, so I know a bit what we're speaking about. You know that a knife can cure and a knife can kill. The difference is the intent of the one who is keeping the knife in the hand. So my understanding today is that AI is exactly the knife, a new knife, very powerful knife in the hands of a man. And then what the man would like to do with it, to cure or to kill, it's already matters. It's also already the question to that man. And that's where we are today. If today the humanity, for example, would use AI in Android, I mean, in anthropomorph robots to help people. Of course, they will help. They will change our life dramatically for good. If militaries will take it to kill people, it can also change our life dramatically. So it's not the question to AI, it's the question for those who use it. Also, I think it's maybe a good point to tell you one myth. That myth is coming from India. It's a myth about the society of nine unknown. The myth says that when at 300 years BC, which is not that long ago, Indian King Ashok was holding some knowledge from the past civilization with a lot of advanced technologies, and he was afraid that people can use it against themselves. So, what he did, he ordered to put those knowledges, all that knowledge, into nine books. Every book is by its area. One book was for microbiology. One book was for the ways of communication, even interstellar communications. And the ninth book was how to manipulate big communities of people, which they said that that's the most dangerous one. And they were protecting those books, that knowledge, and also what they claim in the myth. They were existing through centuries, and if they find that scientists or science is discovering something that can be used right now against the humanity, they were trying to protect humanity about that and to stop that research by somehow. I think that the last mentions about that nine unknown society was in the 20th century. I believe it was 1922 or 1924. A British ambassador in India, he was claiming that he met that society. He was speaking to them, and they exist until now. So up to now, the main purpose of that society is to prevent people from scientific discoveries that can damage the humanity. I do not
It
know. Don't ask me if it's true or not. It's just a myth. But some people nowadays they claim that it's not.
Well, I think this is so interesting. And I think also when we go back to ancient Greece, actually, a lot of these myths are actually, they're just different ways of communicating, conveying some deep wisdom that helps us to. Because I give you an example, and I'm really curious what you are actually thinking about this. Oral traditions, for example, especially in indigenous communities, there are a lot of oral traditions. Now, to some extent, in my view, oral tradition, you tell a tradition, so it has, in order for you to actually, that it sticks, it has to be somehow compelling. So it has to go to your limbic system, which is really attached to your emotion, and therefore you can actually more easily remember it. Whereas if I just give you some couple of facts, it's really hard. But if I tell you a compelling story, then it's much more likely that I will remember it. And so I think a lot of those myths too, they do actually the same thing, because in the past we didn't really had writing, right? I mean, it was, I think, Socrates who said, or Plato who said, like, you know what, this will actually damage our memory, right? When we start writing things down. So what's your point on that?
I fully agree with this. Fully agree with this. You cannot just tell a story with any scientific background to people that have no knowledge. You need to create a fiction story that people can memorize and people can better and easier understand it. And maybe in some generation they understand what was meant by that. Pythagoras, he said that to his students that they should never stop believing in myths, even if they think that that's a crazy tale story, fairy story, or whatever. I want to tell you two simple examples, but nice examples. There is a Greek myth about Io. Io, she was beloved of Zeus. And when the wife of Zeus, she learned about Io, she turned her into a cow. And that cow was running around the earth, and there was a big bee that was always making wounds in that cow, and the blood was always coming out of her body, and she couldn't do anything. She was bleeding, and every time, all the time, blood was coming out from it. Strange myth, really strange myth. When I was reading it, it was really hard to understand what was it about. But when I was studying about Jupiter, I mean the astronomy, right? One of satellites of Jupiter is Io, and Io was always considered as a piece of ice. It's covered with ice, it's dead, and so on. But when satellites came to discover it, they found out that Io is always like bleeding. It's full of volcanoes. It's full of volcanic activities. And when I was reading that discovery of NASA, I immediately reminded that that's exactly what was the. Maybe I'm bringing two things which are separate, but that's such a strange coincidence. That's one thing. And another thing was about Jupiter. I don't remember exactly what myth said. I'm afraid to be wrong, but the myth was saying that the father of Zeus, which is Jupiter, you know that Zeus and Jupiter is the same word, just in Greek and Latin. So the father was eating his kids, and then Jupiter cut his hair, and all the his brothers and sisters went out of this head. And recently, I was also reading astronomical research of NASA. What they say that according to their forecast, when the sun will burn out all its gas inside, it will begin to expand. And when it will begin to expand, it will consume planets up to Jupiter. But Jupiter is so big that it will cut the surface of Sun. All the gas from inside will get out. The Sun will go down to its original mass and size, and then from that gas, the planets can be created once again. So, is it once again two coincidences? I don't know, but it looks really coincidental.
So fascinating. And I mean, there's so many stories, and you really write about those stories really in such a compelling way, with Theodore, who really loses his life. And I think it's so contemporary because we all face, whether you are younger or older, to some extent existential, crises in our lives, right? Those big questions at some point, they will catch up on us. Our purpose, what's the meaning of life, right? Because what we are essentially doing as human beings, we are constantly, whether we are conscious or unconscious about it, constantly making meaning and seeking meaning, right? We extract it, right, all the time, over and over. So
It's
tell
absolutely
us,
true.
so tell us, what made you write this, on one hand, a little bit sad story, obviously, but it has such an in-depth message to us who really are alive and look for a beautiful and meaningful life. And you also have two kids, you have a wife. So what does it tell us, and does it also tell us about yourself, and why do you think you came up with such a compelling story?
Thank you. That's a good question. Uh, if you ask me what people are looking in the life the most, I wouldn't say money. I would say meanings. And I think we all need meanings because we all need to understand what we're living for. In the past, people used to take the meaning, for example, from religion. Religion was saying you're living for this and for that, and everything is clear. Just go ahead and live your life the way you have to. Today, less and less people find their meaning in religion. It's not a problem of religion, I would say. I would say more that all those religious books, most of them, were written in far ancient times and in the ancient language that is not compelling for today's generation. You know that probably 10 years ago, I was really amazed that in the UK, Number four, religion. Official religion was religion of Jedi, which was created after Star Wars. If I'm not wrong, I think in Australia it was number six. And I was asking myself, what makes those people turning the fiction movie into their religion? And I understand that people were trying to find the meaning and find the picture of the world, which mostly fit today's science, today's understanding, and today's language. And in fact, I understand that this ancient Greek philosophy, which sounds like very old and very primitive, in reality it's not. And it was giving the answers which were lost with the time. So my idea with this book was really to try either to give people the new alternative meaning that they can find for themselves, or at least to give the direction where they can go and try to look for it. Maybe they will find. So that was my intent.
And you really, really were able to do it in a very compelling way. What do you think is the main reason why religions are losing ground in this sense? Because I'm always asking myself this, and in my personal background is really, I haven't grown up religious at all, and I was really wondering for until my mid late 20s, really, from atheist to everything a little bit, and ultimately I really found uh, my faith in a religion that I was always mocking, but it was really poor ignorance, right? As Plato said, ignorance is really when you think you know something but you actually don't. And I think it was amazing. And I grew up also, I had the fortunate to live actually with my best friend. He was a Christian, really devout Christian. They always gave me books to read because they wanted to like to save me, and it just drove me further away because it was like, this is suspicious, And so ultimately, and today I'm very fortunate that I have this faith because it just gives me such a world of meaning, for example. And to me, always, it doesn't matter what you believe in. The most, you know, interesting discussion I always have, for example, with atheists, so that's, to me, it doesn't matter. But to me, sometimes I think like there is also a curse in always thinking that we have to know everything, we have to understand everything through science, because it just becomes another religion, as you were saying. And what I find so interesting when it comes to the great religions, Hinduism, and the Abrahamic religion, is that they stood to some extent the test of time. They were able to put up incredible civilization, and to me that's evidence, that's science, in the sense that they were able to live together, to some extent peacefully, and to have a complex society. Because what we often underestimate is that everything that we see, I mean, for example, London or all these big cities, that people are actually able to live together peacefully, it's just incredible. I mean, the complexity, the trust that it takes, you know from hunter gatherers to living in small tribes to living in like these cities where millions of people are. To me, that's almost like a miracle. So what's your take on that? What do you think is the main reason why so many people, and I mean, there is, I think, both sides, but a lot of people, they don't trust, religions, and they go into, new, really new religions that are basically created maybe a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, that's also a good question. I will tell you my opinion, and I do not insist that it's the truth, of course. I understand that the most of religions were formulated and written to non-educated, scientifically non-educated people centuries ago, thousands of years ago, and that was a fairly good story for a big mass of people. When people do not know what is a math, what is astronomy, physics, if you will logically look at any traditional religion, usually it has three parts. Part one is how the world was created, to give a basic picture of the world. The second part gives more or less the rules of behavior in the community. Do this, don't do that, right? So it gives moral principles. And the third part, it gives some rituals to maintain and to keep that religion alive. So if you will take a look at that today, the second part is good. So still, I believe that all those values that those traditional religions were bringing to people, if we will look at Abrahamic religions, the rule number one, don't kill, don't steal, right? If we will look at Buddhism, at Hinduism, the same, don't kill, don't steal, be good. So is it still valid? It is. But if, for example, in the past, uh, if we'll take Christianity, right? If a man would say, why should I believe that? So the answer would be, do, did you see the miracles? So that miracles can be done only by the God. That's the reason for you to believe. And people were keeping that. Then with the centuries, probably when those memories started to go down, the church was trying to keep that by force. You remember the Inquisition and all those parts. Today, people became, from one hand, more educated, from another hand, more free. And people start to ask questions. So, if you say that the world is built like this, I want to understand why. Explain me. I'm ready to believe, but just explain. But the church says, I give you no explanations. So, did you read it? Can you read? So, then read yourself. It's written. So, that's the reason to believe in it. And most of today people, especially the new generation, they say that's not enough for me. I need to understand why. If I read the scientific books, science gives me all the proofs. So if, for example, you read you know that the car behaves like this, like that. You know that there are laws of Newton, law number one, law number two, number three, laws of thermodynamics, and so on. So I understand why. You want to give me your picture of the world, which is different from scientific? Explain me why. And the church doesn't give that. So that's why people start to look for their meanings. The problem is that science, it gives knowledge, but it doesn't give meanings. Like Pythagoras said, never mix up the knowledge and the wisdom. So the science, it gives the knowledge, but it doesn't give wisdom. And people start to look where they can find that wisdom. And here it comes that you spoke about Socrates, you spoke about Plato. Those guys, they were giving exactly the life wisdom, not science, not knowledge, but wisdom. And that's probably what is missing today.
That's a very good point, actually. Why do you think there is such a lack of wisdom? What is it that makes us so much, or gives us so much struggle in really living the right way? Because you mentioned in the book, and of course, it's Pythagoras who says it's not just about living well, but it's really also about living better.
That's true. That's true. You know, once again, we're coming to the previous question. I believe that when traditional religions were giving the framework of coexistence of society, so what is good, what is bad, was defined by religion. Before Abrahamic religions, there were philosophers. The philosophy was defining what is good and what is bad. Right now, in nowadays, when religion is not that respected, then how people define what is good, what is bad? Today is defined by criminal code. You open the criminal code, what is written is bad, it's punished, then it's bad. If something is not written, or you do it differently than it's punished, well, then it means that it's not that bad. And I think that it creates a lot of chaos because I think the only reason why today you mentioned that so many people, like in London, They're living and coming along good between themselves with different religions and with different culture. It's only because when people were raised up, generations of people, with traditional religions, it gave pretty solid foundation about how the behavior and coexistence in society should be, and it's not ruined yet. Because I think that as soon as people start to build their life, they construct the relationship just based on the criminal code, that will not lead us to anything good. And just because the traditional religions are not ruined yet completely, that still uh, allows us to maintain that cultural foundation that we had in the past. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my opinion.
I think, and you mentioning ancient Greece as well. I mean, there was no religion because we didn't really have defined it yet, right? But it's also theology is actually something that emerged. I don't know, like maybe in the seventh, ninth, or 11th century, really. But it was more that we didn't have a name because, to some extent, gods were a given in ancient Greece, right? Although, Socrates and Plato, like, people argue about them if they actually were believing in gods or not, but it was somehow a given. What's your take on that?
Uh, what in the past was called gods, you can give it different names. You can call it God. You can call it like superior intellectual creatures, whatever. Uh, but in the book I was writing, in some part, that in nowadays, there is a well-known theory of evolution of Darwin, but today there is a pretty big community of scientists, biologists, who believe and who propagate the intellectual evolution. What they say that in the time of Darwin, that was absolutely understandable and correct. But today, when we have the knowledge about DNA, when we know that DNA has backups, double backups, triple backups. If DNA is damaged, then the backup is taken. When we see the all the encodings that they find in the bodies, all the structure, they say it cannot be. It's absolutely impossible that that can be done just by itself, just by coincidental mix of particles. That's absolutely the result of intellectual work. And to be honest, I share that. And I really don't mind how you call it. You can call it gods. You can call it superior race, superior civilization, whatever it is. But I do believe that what we see around us, it's really uh, it's really the result of intellectual work. And at the same time, I agree with Darwin, because we cannot contradict to that, because really we see the sequence of there is archaeology. You cannot escape from that. You see by archaeological findings that there is evolution of different kinds. But when you see the result of this evolution, how it came up, I truly believe that it's like you take an airplane, right? Yeah, you remember airplanes 100 years ago were simple and primitive ones, and you see the evolution. You cannot escape from that. There are different models. One is better from previous ones, and just Darwin was claiming that the result of evolution was just that ones were crashing, and the new ones were not, so they won. And what the followers of intellectual evolution say, that yeah, the evolution exists, but it's just the result that every new model is a result of the work of some superior intelligence. That's it. And when we're speaking about the Plato and Socrates, whether they believed in gods or not, I want to tell you two funny facts about Socrates. Very simple, very short. Uh, it's known fact that Socrates never left Athens. He loved Athens and he had said, I will never leave it. In his entire life, he left Athens only twice. One, he left to Samos to visit the place where Pythagoras lived. And the second, he left it to visit Delphi, to visit Pythia. About Plato, you know how Plato became a philosopher? It's also a funny story. It's a true story, in fact. He was supposed to be a politician. He raised up and grew up in a rich family of politicians. His father was politician. He was Democrat. At that time, also in ancient Greece, there were just two parties: Democrats and tyrants. So he was supposed to be a Democrat politician when he was 18. He went to see the meeting of the party, and he said, "My God, what I see here, I will never be the part of that." And then he said, "Okay, if here people are lying, maybe I should go to see tyrants. Maybe those guys are really good." He went to see tyrants, and he saw even worse picture. He said, "I will never go there." And at that time, his friends advised him for any money, for any price, to buy three books of Pythagorean, whose name was Philosophers. And until that, Pythagoreans never wrote any books, any. And Philosophers was the first one who wrote three books. The first one was about the nature, the second was about the soul, and I don't remember what was the third one. And Plato, he bought those books for 150 coins. He read them, and he decided to be a philosopher. And the first time, what he did, as Pythagoras, he spent 22 years in Egypt, and it was the main part of his education. The first thing what Plato did, he went to Egypt, and he said, "Guys, you had Pythagoras here. I want to do the same." And there are a couple of books which describe it. One of them was written even fifth century our era, so it's not that ancient books. So both of them, they were followers of Pythagoras, and both of them, I believe that they were sharing more or less the same picture of the world that Pythagoras shared. That once again on the edge between the religion and the science.
Where does this hunger come from? Is there something in the past that you look back and say, you know what, I think I had this from my mother or father? You know, this search for meaning, this interest in Greek philosophy. What was it that really initiated this quest?
To be honest, I cannot say. I don't remember anything in my childhood that would lead me to that. I think it just came accidentally by itself.
How
Really, I
did it
cannot say that.
how did it change your life when you started reading and also visiting Greek, but especially ancient Greek philosophy? How did it change your life?
Dramatically, really dramatically. It changes your attitude to people around you, to to the relationship between you and your friends, you and your family, you and your colleagues. Uh, I spoke during the shooting of the documentary. I believe it was 2017. We interviewed in Athens one of the members of Pythagorean Society. A woman, she was the professor of physics of solid bodies. And I asked her, according to you, what's the most important in the life? And she said, you know what? Inside our discussions, we discussed that a lot. And of course, we were supposed to say that the most important is what a man does and so on. But she says, no, we came to the conclusion that the atmosphere which a man creates around him and in which he is doing what he is doing is even more important than what he does itself. You can do good things, but you can create aggressive atmosphere around you. And the meaning of those good things that you are doing will go to zero. So, same things you can do in different atmosphere. So the atmosphere that you create around you is even more important from what you do. And that's what I try to follow. I fully agree with that. And when, for example, you are in your family with your kids, when you are, disappointed with something, you're disappointed, and before starting a conflict, you start to think, should I do it? What is more important, to keep the atmosphere of good and friendly relationship in the family, or to raise a conflict? The same in the office. You know, I'm running an IT company, and I know people who were waiting to get a job in our company for a few years. It's not because we're paying more salary. It's not because our company is so distinguished, but just because the atmosphere. We have really family and home atmosphere in the company, and that's probably one of the most precious things that guys are valuing in the company, and the same for me. So, yeah, the first thing that changes in you is your attitude to the world around you, and the relationship that you try to build between you and the world around you. And that it's not just a big words, but it's something real.
And you talk about this in the book in depth, and I think you really call it harmony.
Yeah, it's not me. It's the term of Pythagoras. Yes,
That is really beautiful. And what I can also tell is you can just tell in your expression how you relaxed also are in your face. You can really tell that you really live that. And I think it's beautiful to
thank you.
to see that. What would your wife say if I would ask her how you have changed as a human being from the very beginning when she met you until up today?
That's a good question. Probably it's better to ask her. But just to say that when I decided to write a book, she was supporting me a lot. And a couple of times we were visiting Samos. And you know, when I was gathering material for that book, she was supporting me completely. And my understanding is that she enjoyed that process, same as me.
I also love when you write about doing good and not being fearful. Are there any situation where you think like, well, it's better being fearful than actually doing good in your life?
Uh, you know, I don't think that creating a fear for something is the right method for achieving something. I would bring you a quote of Confucius. Confucius used to say that you can build a country and the society in two different ways. One way, you can create laws and you can create strong enforcement for those laws, and people will follow those laws because of the fear. But that's not a good way, because everyone will look for any door, back door, to bypass that. There is a second way, where you can create a culture that everyone will follow the laws because they think it's right. It's a difficult way, it's a long way, but that's the right way. That's what he said. And you know, Confucius was living exactly the same years as Pythagoras. So it's 2,500 years ago, and I still believe that that's the right way to go. And that's my understanding of how everything should be and organized.
Yeah, and it's so amazing the legacy that really our ancestors left us with, because we really stand on shoulders of giants. And yeah, it's sometimes it always feels like, wow, that's, we basically have everything. It's just up to us to really do it. And what is your advice to really start doing it and not just knowing it? Because wisdom is really doing the right thing at the right time. And so, what is your way? How can we close the gap? Because I see this time and again. We know, let's say, we know what we should eat, we know what's healthy, and yet we choose the other option. There's this gap between knowledge and implementation and really wisdom. How can we bridge it?
I will tell you the honest answer. I do not know, really don't know. Because if you will look around, you will find a lot of right things. You will find a lot of right books which are saying the right, which are giving the right answers to our questions. But do we follow them? We do not. So many times we read a good book, we make conclusions for us. Oh yes, that's the right thing to do. But tomorrow morning we go to the office, we dive into routine, and that routine takes us out from all those conclusions, and we don't follow that too much. Probably I will tell you one more small thing. In Indian religion, like in Christianity, we have a Bible. In Indian religion, two their most saint books would be probably Ramayana and Mahabharata. In Mahabharata, the main warrior, the main character Arjuna, he is fighting the enemies, and the god is helping him. And when Arjuna is trying to say that yes, I want to win, and that's it, the god says, "Look, you are mixing up two things, and you should understand one thing. If you are thinking that in the life of every human, the most important is the result, that's wrong. The result is less important. The most important is how you go to this result, your way to this result, how you made your life, how you lived it through, and so on." And I think, for probably for a couple of years, I was not in agreement with that, with myself. I was thinking how it could be. When I'm living, when I'm doing something, I should come to the result. When I have my life, in the end of the life, I should come to the result. I should have some wealth. I should have children, and so on. But with the years, I understood, probably with the teaching of ancient Greeks, I came to the conclusion that that was absolutely right. You can run after something, you can come to one result, another result, but that's not important at all. The most important is how you go, how you live, how you run. And more we remember this, more we keep this in hand, I think more chance we have to have the right principles for our life.
I think that's so beautiful, and that's true wisdom, really. Not focusing on the results, but basically really focusing on really the journey and do it right. And as you were mentioning, right, it's about harmony. It's creating this atmosphere where people feel welcomed, right? Where people want to come and actually wait for 4 or 5 years to actually join your company. I think that's fantastic. And I think that's truly life changing, and that's truly the meaning of life in so many ways, because if you really can do that, then you can really change life, and that's the ripple effect ultimately that really, yeah, it just shows, it just stand out in so many ways. I want to ask you about, also dying and living. And your book for me is just such a great reflection, because it's really, it's there. Theo dies, at least for some time. He wakes up in another body again. He becomes Alcaeus. He goes to Samos, meets Pythagoras, and but to me that's such a profound analogy, because, and I want to ask you this also. uh, Plato, he talks about this as well, and I'm curious what you're saying generally to life. Do you think that life is really a preparation for dying and death?
Honestly, I don't think so. When we're taking the book, The Pythagorean, uh, when Theo died, it was a metaphorical way to say that his life made no sense. And it would have no difference if he would live 30 years or 60 or 90 years, because his life had no meanings and no sense. So that's why he died, and it was kind of that. When we're speaking about the real life, I would say that if a man would live to prepare for death, that would have less sense. Again, we do not know the truth, and it's all a matter of believe or not believe. It's not something which is scientifically proved, right? So I do believe that everything we do makes sense, and we live to live. Pythagoras said that during the life a man has, it's like exam on how good you are. So it really matters what you do, how you live. It's not the way that you have to prepare yourself for death. No, you should live today, and you should live your life with your family. And don't think about how you will die. Think about how you live today. That's important.
That's so true. And I think that is precisely the best way to actually prepare for dying in death, in the sense that you truly live from moment to moment. And that's what I really see when Theo really confronts Pythagoras, right? And he goes through these trial and errors and he really gets these profound wisdoms, you know, by a teacher that truly has something to offer and that helps him really to confront his dragons, right? And so I want to know about what you think about the dragons that you have and still might have in your life, and more generally about the dragons that most people really face, and how shall we best go about addressing these dragons.
Unfortunately, I can say that I haven't overcome my dragon yet. I know it. I I know what I should do, but I can confirm that that's the biggest battle in your life. It's so easy to find enemies around us, to say that guy is bad, that country is bad, but it's much more difficult to fight yourself when you know what you have to do, when you need to overcome your habits. You know what ancient Greeks used to say? That when you change your habits, you change your temper. When you change your temper, you change your destiny. And this is absolutely true. And I know which habits I need to change. I know how my dragon looks like, and I'm still struggling. It's still in the process. I would love to say that I did it, but I did not.
You're still in the process, and that's, I think, in so many ways, as you mentioned, it's not about the results, it's about the journey, right? And
That's true.
so I think you're definitely greatly on the way, and so it's really beautiful to see. And you mentioned something that is so, because we have this proclivity to always blame the outside world, to always see, these this bad, and we are not really able to hold two contradictory view in our hands and contemplate them and actually recognize that, you know what, you can be absolutely for in many ways for this country, but also for this country, and actually see, you know what, both have, very good points. I find this especially annoying when I see, when I see newspapers, especially in the West. Also, I'm also close to actually London, where I grew up, and it's just so annoying because I find it offensive, as if I cannot really think and see true, because just the propaganda that we also have in the Western world, it's just a very sophisticated propaganda that is so dangerous. And that, to me, is really about also addressing your dragons, because it's never easy looking at especially big problems in the world, wars for example, and actually look and contemplate them and say, you know what, no, there's not a bad and a good guy. That's a fallacy that's really dangerous. And that
I
really, I
absolutely
find,
agree.
it's just,
Absolutely agree.
it's so dangerous. And I find it's bankruptcy of really our intellectual world. It's the poor, contrary, actually, what the great Greek philosophers, for example, always teach us, right? Time and again, and we do the same and the same again. And so that's why I'm extremely pleased to have read this outstanding book, the Pythagorean. And I invite everyone who is listening now to really get a copy of the Pythagorean by Alexander Morpheigh, published by Book Baby. And so, just two more questions, and I can just go on because I can really tell you're an outstanding human being, not just an outstanding author, but really an outstanding human being. And by the way, thank you so much for also taking on the biggest responsibility, that is being a father and a husband. And I think that's beautiful to see.
Thank you.
Second last question: what made you start your own company?
That's probably the less interesting question. I was working in the industry, in the automation, and I saw a lack of specific functionality, so a specific product. I'm working in industrial automation and robotics. So when I was asking our management in my previous company, you see the lack, let's try to build something, and they said that probably that's too complex. We're not sure that we are able to do it. So I left. I took a few friends, and we did it ourselves. But it was over 20 years ago.
Congratulations for having the courage. To me,
Thank you.
really, what I really look most up to is people who have the courage, entrepreneurs, because there's so much risk involved. It's just unbelievable. And having this boldness, and creating value for the world and creating, places where people can join and work, it's just incredible. I mean, really wonderful. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
So,
Yanik.
last question: what makes you truly feel alive?
That's a good question. Probably spending time with my family, and probably besides that, also when you create something, when you create a book, when you write a song, when you create something, I don't know, even in the software, when you invent something, when you create, that makes you feeling alive.
Alexander Morpheigh, thank you so much for being on the show and being truly a gift to myself and really to the world.
Thank you, Yanik. It was really an honor to speak to you. Really, very nice interview, and I'm really glad that you are what you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexander Morpheigh. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.the-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.